There are days when just the idea of building meals or trying to build meals feel hard, especially when there's cooking involved. Like, I know how to cook, but some days building meals feel a little challenging. And I kind of have a theory about that. And by the end of this video, or before I even talk about the end of the video, the theory really more or less is that how to build meals and knowing how to cook aren't exactly the same thing. And by the end of the video, you are going to see that there's a difference between the two and how mastering the meal building process will make eating or nourishing yourself or eating better or feeding yourself just in general a lot simpler, if not easier. So first of all, I want to establish that cooking is a skill. No, cooking is actually a set of skills because there are many things involved with cooking. Like, you might know how to roast something, you might know how to braise something, you might know how to saute, you might know how to chop. If you know how to read a recipe and like cook individual foods, that in and of itself takes some skill. I'm not talking about the practicing, but I'm just saying it takes skill. That's some kind of skill, right? But the thing is, that still does not answer the question of what am I going to eat. That's just showing you how to do something. And that's the other thing about cooking, is that it doesn't make a decision for you. It's not a decision maker. You still have to decide what you're going to eat, what you have the energy for, whether or not you have the ingredients, how much time it's going to take, and if you're willing to put that time, and whether or not what you're making going to satisfy you, right? So making the decisions is a separate thing from cooking, which makes knowing how to cook not the same thing as knowing how to build meals. And that's where that mental task comes in, because making the decisions is a mental task. Cooking is a physical one. And you have to kind of go through the mental task first before you get to that physical one. And building meals is the thing that's going to help you decide. Because you can know how to make individual things, right? But that in and of itself doesn't tell you how you are going to use what you know to make something that's going to work for you, either in this moment, meaning this meal that you're going to have now, or your next meal, be it dinner, or your next set of meals. And this is where that meal building skill or habit comes into play, because that is actually where you want to start. You want to start with knowing how to build your meals, because instead of you thinking I could possibly make 10 different things or 10 dishes, meal building requires that you start from one place, which is, what do I have? And then you go from there, because then it goes from what do I have to what parts of the meal do I need, what is already prepared or semi-prepared, to identifying what's missing, to deciding what's going to make what you do have work together, and then use cooking to either bring what you have together or part of it to build your meal. So the meal building skill in and of itself is a set of decisions which will then move you to utilizing cooking. And in building the skill of learning how to build meals, you will realize that cooking is part of that meal building process without having to be all of it. Or put differently, cooking can be a part of it. It doesn't have to be all of it, because some meals are just going to be cooking intense. Like some meals just require extensive or exhaustive or significant cooking. Like if you're making every single thing from scratch. And then some meals might involve things like reheating your leftovers, putting prepared foods together or assembling them, utilizing frozen foods or even pantry foods that you don't have to cook, you just put together, making one single thing from scratch, or maybe like throwing in some fresh produce into the meal. So right there you see that cooking has different, I guess, levels or different aspects. There are different aspects to cooking. But building meals is the thing that's going to utilize the cooking if you need to. And so what does this meal building exercise looks like? Even though you know to cook, meal building can still be challenging because we come from that place, like I said, of relying on or looking to the cooking that needs to be done versus looking at what we have. So if you are practicing this meal building skill, you want to start by looking at what it is that you have. So if I were to go in my fridge, for example, and before I even do that, I might ask myself, what am I capable of doing right now? What am I in the mood for? Or what do I have the energy and the capacity to do? How much time do I necessarily want to put into this meal? And that gives me an anchoring, I guess, because then it's going to help me make decisions. Because if I can determine that ahead of time, that's me solving part of the problem. So if I know I don't want to put in a lot of energy, I'm okay with doing some cooking. I don't want to do a whole bunch because I've identified the kind of meal that I want, maybe, or identify the parts of the meal, for example, and then what's missing. Remember, you want to look at what's missing, what's already prepped, or what you have to do very little prep for, and then what you're going to bring it together. With that in mind, I go into my freezer and I'm going to build my meal. I already know I don't want to spend a lot of time. I don't want to exert a significant amount of energy, but I'm okay with some. And so going into my fridge, I might see something like frozen meatballs, which have already been prepped. They've already been seasoned. They're just frozen. So cooking them, which I could either do on the stovetop, which I don't want to do, so I'm going to use the air fryer. So I've identified my protein, which is my meatballs. And then I want to pair that with some carbs. So I'm thinking some pasta, which I do have. And I know this is part of the cooking that I'm going to have to do a little more involved. That just involves boiling some water and putting that in to get cooked. And that takes care of my carbohydrates. And then I'm thinking I want some produce, right? I'm going to throw in some veggies because we're trying to build as balanced a meal as we can. And I want to use up these tomatoes that I have on my counter, and as well as this zucchini that I have. That can be thrown into the meal either closer to the end, or I can cook it down when I'm cooking the sauce. And then what's going to bring these two things together, or these three things together? A sauce. What kind of sauce? I have some marinara sauce because, again, I don't have the energy, or I don't want to cook something from scratch or make a sauce from scratch. I have some jar sauce that I am going to use. And so that's going to bring everything together, or make everything work together. This is what meal building looks like for me, and something that I am teaching everybody to do. So bringing all of that together, there is some cooking involved. There is some cutting up that might be involved. I could have also had these already done in the fridge, but no, some chopping involved. The air fryer is going to take care of the meatballs. I'm going to cook the pasta, and then I'm going to bring it all together in another pan where I'm going to saute using some extra virgin olive oil. This is my healthy fats. Saute the veggies, and then I'm going to add the sauce, and then I'm going to add the meatballs after they've been put in the air fryer just to get them heated through and coated with the sauce, and then I'm going to add that on top of the pasta, or I can mix the pasta in with it. That's me building a meal in real time, because, and I could use a recipe to do that, to help me do that, but I'm not, because again, I've already outlined how you build a meal, which you can do with or without a recipe. If I didn't know how to do any of this, or I was trying to make things from scratch, like say meatballs, I might use a recipe to bring meatballs to help me make the meatballs from scratch. But since I already did that, I am not. But I'm just saying that's an example of how you could utilize a recipe. How to make turkey meatballs in marinara sauce. That's a recipe that I could have pulled from. So here is the practical approach that I want you to, I guess, adapt, if not practice. Because what I did, or what I am doing, is instead of me saying, I don't want to cook. I mean, I could still say I don't want to cook. I don't feel like cooking. What I will do is identify the part of the meal that feels hard. And then that is what's going to solve my problem, or a lot of my problem. Because if I had decided that I wanted to make turkey meatballs in marinara sauce with pasta, and my turkey meatballs had not yet been done, that would have been the hard part for me, given where I'm at right now and what effort I want to exert in the kitchen. That would have been the hard part, which would have meant me choosing something else. Because I would have had to make this from scratch. I would have had to have the turkey meat, and then I would need to mix in whatever, breadcrumbs, egg, chop up, do more chopping, and create the meatballs themselves. That would have taken me more time, and that would have required more effort, and I would not have wanted to do that. So that would have made me choose something easier. Because they're already prepared, then I didn't have to make that decision. I just simply pop them in the air fryer. So identifying the part of the meal that feels hard is one way for you to move forward. It's an simpler way, because again, easy does not mean easy for me might not be easy for you. However, if you can answer that question, you've solved a big part of the problem. How to build a meal that can meet you where you are. You want to build meals to meet you where you are, either in the moment or for your future self, knowing, you might end up on those days where you don't have the capacity and don't have the energy, or you just don't want to. Meet yourself where you are. What part of the meal feels hard and is going to prevent me from making something that's going to feed me? Or if I can solve that, then I can then find the alternative that's going to allow me to feed myself. So even though you know how to cook, building meals is a thing that's going to make it easier for you to feed yourself or nourish yourself, because the decision making has to happen before you start the cooking. Cooking in and of itself is a tool that is used as part of the meal building process. It does not have to be the whole thing. And that's the important thing for you to recognize, in order for you, if you are trying to nourish yourself a little better, if you're trying to not feel discouraged about nourishing yourself, or feeling like, okay, you need more recipes, or you need to cook more often, or you need to learn something new. You do not have to do that. You can identify the parts of the meal that feel hard. But before you even identify the parts of the meal, identify parts of the meal, the different parts of a meal. What part of it feels hard for you to bring it together, and then move from there. So tell me, what feels hard for you? Cooking or making the decisions that would probably utilize cooking before you get to the cooking? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.